Have you ever noticed that some people seem to have a habit of repeating the same phrase over and over again, and it sounds something like this?
That's hot. 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 This is hot. That's hot. That's hot. This is really hot. That's 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 really hot. That's 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 hot. That was hot. That's hot. That is really hot.
There can be 100 people in the room and 99 don't believe in you. But I had this one incredible talent with me. There can be 100 people in the room and 99 don't believe in you, and you just need one to believe in you, and that was him. So you can have 100 people in the room that are watching you and 99 don't believe in you, and one does, and that was him. So, you know, there could be 100 people in the room and 99 don't believe, but all it takes is one. You know, 100 people can be in a room and 99 don't believe in you, and just one person believes in you, and it can change everything.
Now, does astrology say anything about why some people have that behavior? Now, astrologically, we call this a Mercury retrograde. And this is very different from the Mercury retrograde that happens in the sky. We are talking about the kind of Mercury retrograde that occurs in a birth chart. And what this means is that people with Mercury retrograde were born with the planet Mercury actually retrograde in their birth chart. Now, having a Mercury retrograde in your chart is actually considered pretty rare, because roughly about maybe only 17% of the human population will have Mercury retrograde. Now, on the whole, it's not really that big of a problem that you want to repeat the same phrase over and over again. It's not really a problem for most people. But what is the biggest issue for Mercury retrograde is that they come across as being people who are not very smart, or that they don't know what else to say, so they just kind of fill the silence with a phrase that apparently they have memorized, or and worst of all, sometimes Mercury retrograde people get teased, and potentially in a professional setting. For example, you know, when we talk about people like Paris Hilton and Lady Gaga, they are interviewed often, and you'll find that this behavior shows up in the strongest way when they are asked for an on-the-spot reaction.
How was that transition to being followed around all day and trying to really be you?
Well, you know, obviously I'm used to being on camera from being on camera for so long, but I've always been a very naturally shy person, so I loved just inventing this character and playing that character, and to actually be myself was a completely different experience.
But going into the studio to create pop music, after working with Tony in jazz, which is so raw, it's so authentic, and there's no production. Do you know what I mean? There's no twisting of the dials. It's you and the music behind you. Do you reapproach?
Well, there is twisting of the dials. They're just different dials.
Yeah.
You know, you're twisting. You're twisting the same sorts of dials in different ways.
So if you put a microphone in their face and, oh, what did you think of this and that? And for most people, you could just come up with an answer. But for many Mercury retrograde people, it's very stressful for them that, hey, wait, I need some time to think about it. And which is why for many professionals like Paris Hilton and for Lady Gaga, they kind of needed like a phrase that they could fall back on over and over again. And some of you may be thinking, yeah, but how about like the people who are like not that famous? You know, how does this show up? Now, if in a regular setting, this can be, say, in a corporate setting where your boss is asking you for an update on a project. And if you had Mercury retrograde, it could be feeling like, okay, oh shit, like, you know, I need to give an answer right off the bat. Okay, so I found from my experience that for many people with Mercury retrograde, that you can actually find instances of this in their very early life. There are sometimes Mercury retrograde is associated with learning disabilities. Some examples I've come across before are people with dyslexia, like inability to spell properly. I even know of one case where this girl was able to write backwards, which I think is pretty cool, that she actually writes in like mirror image, which is cool, right? I also know of people who had who used to mumble, or perhaps they had a lisp, or some kind of physical disability that meant that they could not communicate in a very clear manner. In one case, I even know of someone who had moved to a foreign country when they were very young, so much so that they did not speak the native language of the people who were there. But what you realize is that all these disabilities and situations meant that this person had grown up in an environment where they would just shut up, they would just keep quiet, or they didn't have the confidence to be able to speak up like the way most normal people do. And this means that on the whole, when it comes down to reacting in a verbal manner, they sometimes feel very disadvantaged. And they get around it by depending on crutches, just like what you've seen Lady Gaga and Paris Hilton do. But so far, I haven't painted a very good picture of Mercury retrograde. It sounds terrible, doesn't it? Okay, but I've also found, from what I've noticed with Mercury retrograde people, the beautiful thing is that they have not taken communication for granted. Many of these people grow up to become very exceptional communicators. I know from experience that several of my Mercury retrograde students have consistently given me some of the best exam scripts I've seen before. Now, I also see that professionally, the fact that these people have taken the time to really sit back and think about how they can communicate in a better manner, I found that they have a very special talent. It is the ability to communicate in non-verbal ways. So we think about communicating as texting or writing an email, or like me, speaking in a video. But what we don't realize is that a photograph, a well-taken photograph, is also a great message. There are people who deal with video, there are people who deal with animation, and even, the way you dress, a dance move can be a form of communication as well. And these are the non-direct ways of communication that Mercury retrograde excels in. Now, I want you to consider that Lady Gaga communicates more through her dance moves than through rah rah, oh mama. I mean, you get my point, right? Now, another example that I want to illustrate is somebody really famous, and that is Keanu Reeves. Okay, so if you think about what a big blockbuster actor he is, but have you noticed that Keanu Reeves, well, you couldn't really quote his lines. Think about in The Matrix, in this iconic scene where he just stops all the bullets and he goes, wow. And that's like, quotable quote, right? And in more recent times, one of his more well-known roles is for John Wick. And you realize in that movie, he doesn't really talk very much. And it's a lot easier for John Wick to make his point, not with words, but with fighting. That's how he does it, okay? Now, if we go back a little bit more into history, let me show you another fantastic example, and that is the famous director, Alfred Hitchcock. And those of you who are familiar with the classic Hitchcockian films will know that you do not want to focus on the dialogue in the film, because it really doesn't matter what the characters are saying. The script itself is pointless. And you'll find that Alfred Hitchcock is most famous for communicating with audio cues, as well as images, a shadow passing, or even just, the spectre of a bird at a window. And it's through that he became the master of suspense, playing with what our eyes see and what our ears hear, and through that communicating what a script cannot communicate. So some of you may be saying, yeah, but not everybody is Keanu Reeves, not everybody is Alfred Hitchcock, and not everyone is lucky enough to be involved in a very visual medium. But what if you had a more conventional job like an engineer? So in a real case example, one of my clients had dealt with PowerPoint slides that she had a lot of trouble communicating her thoughts using words. So in fact, once she had switched into animation using pictures instead, now her presentations are very well known, and she's feedback and said that, well, we found that images can communicate things much better than words can. So for those of you who are watching this, now you may or may not have Mercury retrograde. You can go check it out in our chart generator in the description below. But if you're dealing with someone who seems to be exhibiting a lot of the traits of a Mercury retrograde, remember 17% of the human population has this, so roughly about 1 in 5 persons. So you do not want to make fun of them. And in fact, what I would encourage organizations and teams is to recognize if somebody has a specific talent for being able to communicate their ideas in non-verbal ways that frankly could be more interesting than the way the rest of us does it. So I hope you guys like this video. I'll see you guys next one.